7 forms of lightsaber combat. So if you don't know, there in Star Wars there's these things called lightsabers, and people fight with them. And there's 7 forms of combat that people use. Um, so this just means there's like 7 styles of fighting, or at least this is how I see it. Um, there are 7 styles of fighting, but you can like mix and mash them together. So you could have someone who uses like Form 1 and Form 3, and they're going to fight completely differently from someone who uses Form 1 and Form 4. And even if you have someone who fights like with Form 1 and Form 3, there could be another person who uses the same forms, but they fight differently just because it's like a difference in styles. But it's like they've got 7 main styles that pretty much everything falls into. So I'm just going to go through each one of them and kind of describe them. Um, so Form 1 is the first form ever made, and this is something I love about the 7 forms of lightsaber combat. Oh, and quick disclaimer, pretty much everything I know about the 7 forms of lightsaber combat comes from Legends. I believe that there's like a book out there that mentions them and like details them, and then it's various forms have been mentioned throughout canon. For example, Windu mentions Vapad. He's in episode 3 when he's fighting cities. He's like, Anakin, this is beyond Vapad or something. And then in Rebels, during the first battle between Kanan Jarrus and the Grand Inquisitor is basically like, yeah, you rely on Form 3 to a ridiculous degree, and that's how I know who your master is. Which, even though that doesn't really make sense, realistically he should be like, well, I've looked at... Like, instead of figuring out who his master is by his lightsaber form, he should figure out who Kanan Jarrus is through his lightsaber form, and then know who his master is through Kanan Jarrus. I think that's a lot more plausible of an explanation. Because obviously Anakin doesn't use Form 3, Obi-Wan uses Form 3, so, like, clearly it's not like your master determines your form. You determine your form, and that's going to be influenced by your master. For example, Ahsoka learned Form 5, at least a little bit. She supplemented it with Form 4. Then there's, who is it? Obi-Wan Kenobi learned Form 4, and he uses that in Episode 1 mostly, but he also uses it a bit at other times. And his master, Qui-Gon Jinn, used Form 4 as well. And Qui-Gon's master's master, Master Yoda, also used Form 4. So there's like a strong lineage of Form 4 in that line of masters. But as I was saying, because the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, like, they have numbers, and that corresponds to when they were made, and it kind of like they kind of flow from one form to the other. Like, it starts with Form 1, and Form 1 is often described as like basic. Like the benefits of Form 1 are like it's very simple to use, which means you can like be a lot more creative in your fighting. Like a lot of what you do is based on instinct, which is, it's faster. It's, like you're not relying on like tight maneuvers or strong attacks. It's more free flowing, and there's a lot of wider arcs, so it's just easier to, I guess, flow with the fight, and be a bit more creative with your fighting. So that's the first form. It's often described as simple for those reasons, and that's because it is. It's like the first lightsaber form ever made, so it's going to be a lot more simple than the other ones. Then after Shucho, you get to Mukashi, which is all about like one-on-one dueling. It's a lot like fencing. Think Count Dooku, and that's your like archetype form 2. Grip, like one-handed lightsaber, pointed towards your opponent, kind of turned sideways. Lots of good positioning, always ready to stab forward or take a step back. It's very fencing-like, and it's very conducive to one-on-one combat. And it's probably, or at least in Legends, it was developed to directly combat Form 1, because Form 1 is kind of more free-flowing, and Form 2 is like, well, if you're going to overswing, I'm just going to be ready to stab you, because I'm using Form 2, and I'm always ready because I'm in good positioning. Then you have Form 3, and this is kind of, at least in Legends, again, most of this is Legends information. Then you have Form 3, which is a reaction to the development of blasters and the wider use of them. And I could be wrong in this, but I think it might also be like the Sith were like banished, or the Jedi like ended the Great Schism or whatever. There's some history there, but I'm not quite sure when this takes place. But it comes about due to like Makashi falling out of style, because you're no longer fighting a duelist, you're fighting blaster wielding opponents, and so you have this defensive style that's very good at deflecting lots of blaster fire. So there's Form 3. And going along with Form 3, there's also Form 4, which is a lot faster, so you can close the distance on blaster fire. You can close the distance on Form 3 users. So it's just kind of a reaction to blaster fire and Form 3 users. And let me briefly describe those two. Form 3 is basically the defensive form is basically the easiest way to describe it. It's got a solid stance, but it's not like super rigid. Like really tight elbows, always ready to move the blade in the way. Lots of static blocks. So you're not usually like deflecting a blow. You're usually blocking it. Think if you want to think of one. If you want to think of a specific character, the go-to character for Form 3 is Obi-Wan Kenobi, which it's not quite as pronounced as, say, like Count Dooku in Form 2, or as I'm going to get to, like Yoda in Form 4, simply because Form 3 it's like a very common, like, fighting style, like, in our own world. Like, you get two kids, like, and give them, like, those plastic lightsabers, one of them is gonna like use Form 5, the other one's gonna use Form 3, probably. I mean, like, there's some variations there. You might have a kid who uses Form 1 or whatever, but they're gonna have some elements of Form 3. It's very similar to like common fighting, two hands, solid stance. You know, it's Form 3. Just think like Obi-Wan, minus like the flips, because he does use some like Ataru as well. But when he's on defensive, that's Obi-Wan. So watch closely and you see Form 3. Then there's Form 4, which, as I mentioned earlier, can be like the archetype of Form 4 is like a Yoda. Like lots of flips, lots of outmaneuvering, outflanking, the whole like Jedi flips. It seems unrealistic. However, there is another side to Form 4, and that is like Qui-Gon Jinn. Oftentimes when I bring up Form 4, I bring up both Yoda and Qui-Gon Jinn, because Yoda uses Form 4, but he's kind of an extreme version of it, because he's short, so he actually uses Form 4 to make up for his lack of reach. And so he's like jumping all over the place, like way more than a normal Form 4. And then there's Qui-Gon Jinn, who, although I don't think it's confirmed in Legends, he at least seems to me to be using a lot of Form 5 as well. He seems to have a lot of power behind his attacks, rather than just jumping around and outflanking. And perhaps he incorporated more Form 5 as he got older and slower. But at the very least, I do think he uses some elements of Form 5. But still, his primary form is Form 4. And you can see that Form 4 isn't always the same way Yoda uses it, where it's all flashy and flippy and all that. It's just also just an aggressive form, I guess. I forgot what I was going to mention, so I'm just going to move on to Form 5, which is another one targeted toward blaster fire, except Form 5, for some reason, I don't know why, but Form 5 is split into two different like words. And I should probably go through these real quick, because I don't think I mentioned them. Form 1 is also known as Shicho, and there's various pronunciations of it, but, you know, Shicho is how I learned it. And then Form 2 is called Makashi, or Makashi, or whatever. You can say it however you want. And then there is Form 3, which is Sorisu, or a lot of people say Soresu, or Soresu. Again, it's just a bunch of vowels. You can say it however you want. It's English. Vowels don't do anything. Then there is Form 4, Ataru, and then Form 5 is for some reason split into Shien and Djemso. Shien is specifically blaster fire, and Djemso is specifically lightsaber combat. At least that's how I understand it. Anyways, Form 5 is all about redirecting your opponent's attacks against them. And this isn't quite like That's like the basic explanation, but it's more specific than that. With Blaster Fire, that's about all the explanation you need. You're not like in Form 3, you're just deflecting bolts to the side, you're just batting them away as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. But Form 5, you're actually like angling your lightsaber and deflecting the blaster bolts back at the shooter. Which is why oftentimes when you shoot at a Jedi, the bullets go right back because they've done some Xian and they're ready to shoot your bullets right back at you. Then there's the lightsaber dueling aspect of Form 5, which I find a lot more interesting, but it's also redirecting your. Okay, it's kind of. It's not so much redirecting your attack, so much as it is when they block your attack, they're going to strike with so much power that your attack is not the attack. Their like attack is just gonna push your blade back towards you, like just using brute strength. So you see a lot of like Darth Vader, what's his name? Blanking on his name. It's not Darth Malak, it's Darth Malgus, and like Darth Bane. All the like big buff people, oftentimes they use Form 5 because it relies on a lot of strength based. I'm just gonna push you around so that you can attack. I'm attacking. It's very focused on getting the offense through strength. Then there's Form 6, also known as Niman, and this is like a jack of all trades form. And this is probably the one I'm least comfortable with. But it's mostly just like a versatile form that you can do pretty much whatever you want in. There's elements of all the forms basically. There's a lot of oftentimes like a Niman user will use like different weapons like saber staff or dual bladed or this kind of stuff. And to me, using like a saber staff doesn't necessarily mean you use Niman. But if you're comfortable with a saber staff, like normal lightsaber, if you're comfortable with pretty much whatever, you might be a Niman user. But there also has to be some elements of just versatility in combat and kind of just incorporating everything: offense, defense, precision, simplicity, acrobatics, and stability. All the stuff. It's all mixed into one. Then there's Form 7, which is split into Juyo and Vapad, but this one actually makes sense, at least to me. Juyo is the original Form 7, and first I'm just going to give a brief description of Form 7 offense. That's pretty much the focus of Form 7 is just taking out your opponent as quickly as possible. So Juyo is the original Form 7, and it's actually based in the dark side. So like, oftentimes Juyo users will like draw on their dark emotions and use anger and all this stuff to kind of focus their attacks on their opponent. Which, how that's a fighting style, I'm not entirely sure, but I guess it's just the mentality you use that splits it from Vapad to Juyo. But Form 7 as a whole is just offensive, so it kind of makes sense that those who use it are going to rely more on their anger in combat, because that's a good fuel for taking out your opponent as quick as possible. It's just good practice for when you're on offense, I guess. Okay, so, that's weird. The chat thing isn't working, I guess. I have to go over here. That's fine. I can hang out in this page for most of the time. You can't really see the page I'm talking to. I don't know why I'm talking about that. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's a couple chats that came in. Jeremiah said, "What is the great disaster?" Referring to the last segment, which is all about the light of the Jedi. And it's basically, read the book. It'll tell you what the great disaster is. So yeah, all of you should go read Light of the Jedi. It's a good book. Then watch my review on it. And then Jeff Summers said he thinks he's either Form 2 or Form 3, which, yeah, I can see. I can also see Form 1 for you. But yeah, Form 2 and Form 3, I could totally see you, especially if you were to pick one. I think you'd pick one of those two. Yeah, and so anyways, Form 1 is kind of simplicity. It's lots of wide strikes and movements. Form 2 is very precise. You're always in good position and ready to take advantage of any mistakes your opponents make. Then you've got Form 3, which is defensive. It's just like solid stance, elbows tight, defensive. Then there's Form 4, which is acrobatic. which seems unrealistic until you realize that Jedi have the Force, and then it's like, oh, that makes sense. It's a lightsaber form. So yeah, Form 4 is kind of offensive, lots of outflanking, and not so much blocks as much as dodges. I mean, there are blocks, but like when they do block, it's more of a deflection rather than a solid block. Then there's Form 5, which is all about redirection, specifically redirection through just being stronger. Then there's Form 6, Niman, which is like the Jack of all trades form. It's a bit of everything. Then there's Form 7, which is just super aggressive, super offensive. Yeah, so that's all 7 lightsaber forms. Leave your, I guess, picks for which ones you would want to use. Actually, I'm never good at choosing one. I think I would probably actually choose Niman now that I think about it, because like I change so often. So I'm gonna say Niman because it's a jack of all trades. I'm gonna also add Shicho because I just kind of think that the simplicity is kind of nice, and Makashi as well, because Makashi is just the best. I do, like, obviously I'm not a Jedi. I don't do a lot of like blaster fighting, but I do play with my friends sometimes and do some like sword fighting. There's like other weapons too, but so Makashi kind of applies in that sense because Makashi is focused more on like melee weapon dueling rather than blaster wielding. So I'm going to say if I were to pick 3 forms, I would do Form 6, Form 1, and Form 2. And you don't have to do like 3, you don't have to do like 1 or 2. Choose however many and leave your picks in the chat or in the comments. But with that, I think I'm going to move to the next segment.